Good morning, everyone. It's Saturday, and we're doing the Undiscovered Self by Carl Gustav Jung, an essay also named Present and Future. Last week, we went through the plight of the individual in modern society, and this week, we're doing religion as a counterbalance to mass-mindedness. I'm MC Starman, Martin Comtois, and I'm with my friend Luke Randa here. Really beautiful to be working with you, my friend, on this.
Yeah, it's great. I hope people get some value out of it.
Well, I know I'm getting some value out of it a lot. It's helping me really, deepen my understanding of this particular essay, and as a presenter and a lecturer, mastering your material is really important. So I'll let you start with the first part of the chapter 2 of the Undiscovered Self.
Sure,
Religion as the counterbalance to mass-mindedness. You roll.
Okay. In order to free the fiction of the sovereign state, in other words, the whims of the chieftains who manipulate it, from every wholesome restriction, all socio-political movements tending in this direction invariably try to cut the ground from under religion. For in order to turn the individual into a function of the state, his dependence on anything else must be taken from him. Religion means dependence on and submission to the irrational facts of experience. These do not refer directly to social and physical conditions. They concern far more the individual's psychic attitude.
We have such a resistance to that word religion, but here what he says: religion means dependence on and submission to the irrational facts of existence, of experience. And so what he means by that is our relationship with the numinous, our relationship with spirit. And so in our day and age now, we're not so fond of the word religion. We call it spirituality. But I think this is what he talks about, is a connection to spirit and a connection to spirituality. And he'll explain more as we get going here.
Well, and he kind of, right here, he says he's trying to free the fiction of the state, which is the whims of the chieftains who manipulate it, from every wholesome restriction, right? And it's kind of like having these spiritual values. Those are the restrictions he's talking about, right? And it's they got to free the state completely from that. And I find that really interesting because the state has to be the supreme. You can't have religion or family or anything else, right? But he'll continue and go on about it. So maybe you should just start with the second chapter or the second paragraph.
Okay, here it is. But it is possible to have an attitude to the external conditions of life only when there is a point of reference outside them. Religion gives or claims to give such a standpoint, thereby enabling the individual to exercise his judgment and his power of decision. It builds up a reserve, as it were, against the obvious, inevitable force of circumstances to which everyone is exposed, who lives only in the outer world and has no other ground under his feet except the pavement. If statistical reality is the only one, then that is the sole authority. There is then only one condition, and since no contrary condition exists, judgment and decision are not only superfluous, but impossible. Then the individual is bound to be a function of statistics, and hence a function of the state, or whatever the abstract principles of order may be called. Sometimes this scientific language, this objectivity is a little bit difficult for us to grasp, from our modern perspective. Reading Jung requires an ability to kind of translate what he's saying. What do you think he's saying in this paragraph?
Yeah, it's deep, this one, the second one. But yeah, like
Yeah,
having that reserve, right? Like having something for yourself. I was listening to a qigong guy talk the other day about the center point, and just having something for yourself, where like it's like a pathway in your soul that no one else gets to walk on, right? And that's
right,
that spiritual fortitude that people have. And when you're a mass-minded person, you don't have that. You are part of the mass. You don't even have any self-sovereignty, right? And I think
right,
that's what he talks about, this spiritual fortitude and this reserve, right? That people need in order to survive against
right. He
becoming.
says, religion gives or claims to give such a standpoint. Therefore, thereby enabling the individual to exercise his judgment and his power of decision. So the spiritual aspect of a personality's development allows the individual to look at the movement of the masses in an objective way. So it provides an outlook outside of the collective masses. Like one of the quotes that I love about Jung, he says, spirituality is pure, or self-realization is pure objectivity. To be able to be objective, to separate ourselves from the opinion of the masses and separate ourselves from the state, we need a spiritual context, a context outside of ourselves. And that's what religion is supposed to offer the human being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And in the last chapter we read, where he talks about, when people's emotions kind of get carried away, then all of a sudden reason sort of leaves, right? And that's why having that spiritual center is always so important.
You want to do the next paragraph?
Yes, sure. Religion, however, teaches another authority opposed to that of the world. The doctrine of the individual's dependence on God makes just as high a claim upon him as the world does. It may even happen that the absoluteness of this claim estranges him from the world in the same way as he is estranged from himself when he succumbs to the collective mentality. He can forfeit his judgment and power of decision in the former case for the sake of religious doctrine, quite as much as in the latter. This is the goal which religion openly aspires to, unless it compromises with the state. When it does so, I prefer to call it not religion, but a creed. A creed gives expression to a definite collective belief, whereas the word religion expresses a subjective relationship to certain metaphysical, extra-mundane factors. A creed is a confession of faith intended chiefly for the world at large, and is thus an intra-mundane affair, while the meaning and purpose of religion lies in the relationship of the individual to God, or to the path of salvation and liberation. From this basic fact, all ethics is derived, which without the individual's responsibility before God can be called nothing more than conventional morality.
So then he makes that point. So from our perspective, we look at religion as this, that's this kind of, what he calls a creed, and so then he defines religion as, it's interesting. You have this paragraph here, but do you have it? So a creed is a confession of faith intended chiefly for the world at large, and is thus an intramundane affair. So that's modern religion. While the meaning and purpose of religion, what we call spirituality, lie in the relationship of the individual to God. And in parenthesis, in this version, he puts Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, or to the path of salvation and liberation. And he puts in parenthesis Buddhism. And so kind of differentiates between Eastern and Western religion, and how, and so that's interesting. But I think do you get that? How do you feel about that?
The next chapter, I think he goes into creed a bit more, because he talks about how like religion is a subjective thing, like it's like spirituality, it's a subjective thing, whereas this creed is simply a social thing.
Right.
And in the next chapter, he explains it, whereas like it's like almost superficial.
You mean the next
You know what I
paragraph?
mean? Yeah, you want to do that one, or
Yeah, it's my turn, right?
okay, yeah.
Since they are compromises, with mundane reality, the creeds have accordingly seen themselves obliged to undertake a progressive codification of their views, doctrines, and customs, and in so doing have externalized themselves to such an extent that the authentic religious element in them, the living relationship to and direct confrontation with their extra mundane point of reference, has been thrust into the background. The denominational standpoint measures the worth and importance of the subjective religious relationship by the yardstick of traditional doctrine, and where this is not so frequent as in Protestantism, one immediately hears talk of pietism, sectarianism, eccentricity, and so forth, as soon as anyone claims to be guided by God's will. A creed coincides with the established church, or, at any rate, forms a public institution whose members include not only true believers, but vast numbers of people who can only be described as indifferent in matters of religion, and who belong to it simply by force of habit. Here, the difference between a creed and a religion becomes palpable.
Yeah, I don't. He nails it there, right? It kind of explains. He sort of explains every chapter as he goes along in this, and you get a deeper understanding. Every paragraph, right? Every
Right.
paragraph, your understanding deepens.
Do you think there's anything that needs to be explained in that last paragraph we read?
No, I don't think so. I think if we continue, people will
Go right ahead.
understand more, you know? So here we go. To be the adherent of a creed, therefore, is not always a religious matter, but more often a social one. And as such, it does nothing to give the individual any foundation. For this, he has to depend exclusively on his relation to an authority, which is not of this world. The criterion here is not lip service to a creed, but the psychological fact that the life of the individual is not determined solely by the ego and its opinions or by social factors, but quite as much, if not more, by a transcendent authority. It is not ethical principle, however lofty, or creeds, however orthodox, that lay the foundation for the freedom and autonomy of the individual, but simply and solely the empirical awareness. The inconvertible experience of an intensely personal reciprocal relationship between man and an extra-mundane authority, which acts as a counterpoise to the world and its reason.
Wow. And that's, even though this was written in the late 1950s, you get a sense of how poignant it is to the current, zeitgeist of, what is the meaning of religion. We see, the religion has become creed and have become, and that's one of the points that he makes. He says, from a pure Jungian perspective, he talks about how if you extrovert a spiritual process
Right.
versus introverting it, so extroverting is to wear all the proper clothes and to, like we even do it with yoga now, we have, and we externalize as process, religious and spiritual processes, and crystallize these habits into forms that are stagnating and that don't actually offer the realization available if one actually internalizes, introverts the process. And he's going to talk about that more. You want to go ahead? Or is it my turn now?
I think it's your turn if you want to
Okay.
read this one.
So I like that though, the experience of an intensely personal reciprocal relationship between man and an extra mundane authority which acts as the counterpoise to the world and its reason. This formulation will not please either the mass man or the collective believer. For the former, the policy of the state is the supreme principle of thought and action. Indeed, this was the purpose for which he was enlightened. And accordingly, the mass man grants the individual a right to exist only insofar as he is a function of the state. The believer, on the other hand, while admitting that the state has a moral and factual claim on him, confesses to the belief that not only man, but the state that rules him is subject to the overlordship of God. And that in case of doubt, the supreme decision will be made by God and not by the state. Since I do not presume any metaphysical judgments, I must leave it an open question whether the world, namely the phenomenal world of man, and hence nature in general, is the opposite of God or not. I can only point to the fact that the psychological opposition between these two realms of experience is not only vouched for in the New Testament, but is still exemplified very plainly today in the negative attitude of the dictator states to religion and of the church to atheism and materialism. Do you get that?
Yeah. It's like the way it works in sort of like a legal standpoint or whatever is like God created man, man created government, right? Government and the state didn't create man, but yet with this almost elevating the state to the standpoint of religion, it's like now we all human beings are like under the state now, which that's not the way it should be, right? It's
right.
God, man, then the state.
And in our modern times, in this postmodern age, we value nature and spirit to be on the same side. And we look at the collective religions, the creeds, and the state as to be this material, the world of man. And now nature, because in this paragraph, he puts nature on the one side, and so that's really, with materialism and with, what is he saying? Since I do not presume to any metaphysical judgment, and must leave it an open question whether the world, namely the phenomenal world of man, and hence nature in general, is the opposite of God or not. We've changed, we changed that, we look at God and nature, and a lot of us, we use the word nature instead of the word God. And we look at the creeds and we look at the collective, what we call the man or the system, which is really anti-nature and anti-God. So from the time he wrote this to now, in our current language, it's a little bit different. But he explains that a little bit better.
Well, it's the artificial and the natural too, right? Like what we've kind of created these artificial structures that, nature doesn't really adhere to. And then in a way, the further we go away from the natural structures, the more we will suffer, essentially.
Exactly.
Right?
Or
we go away from natural.
Right. Or the less objectivity we have. We
Yeah.
want to be able to not get caught up in the collective psychosis. So then our connection with spirit is so important, because that gives us the objectivity to look at the collective narrative and to be able to be critical of it, or at least objective to it, without, getting caught up in it. You want to go for the next one?
Emotionally. Yeah, let's do this next one.
Okay.
Just as man, as a social being, cannot in the long run exist without a tie to the community, so the individual will never find the real justification for his existence and his own spiritual and moral autonomy anywhere except in an extra-mundane principle capable of relativizing the overpowering influence of external factors. The individual who is not anchored in God can offer no resistance on his own resources to the physical and moral blandishment of the world. For this, he needs the evidence of inner transcendent experience, which alone can protect him from the otherwise inevitable submission in the mass. Merely intellectual or even moral insight into the stultification and moral irresponsibility of the mass is a negative recognition only and amounts to not much more than a wavering on the road to the atomization of the individual. It lacks the driving force of religious conviction, since it is merely rational. The dictator state has one great advantage over bourgeoisie reason. Along with the individual, it swallows up his religious forces. The state takes the place of God. That is why, seen from this angle, the socialist dictatorships are religions and state slavery is a form of worship. But the religious function cannot be dislocated and falsified in this way without giving rise to secret doubts, which are immediately repressed so as to avoid conflict with the prevailing trend towards mass-mindedness. The result, as always, in such cases is overcompensation in the form of fanaticism, which in turn is used as a weapon for stamping out the least flicker of opposition. Free opinion is stifled and moral decision ruthlessly suppressed on the plea that the end justifies the means, even the vilest. The policy of the state is exalted to a creed. The leader or party boss becomes a demigod beyond good and evil, and his votaries are honored as heroes, martyrs, apostles, or missionaries. There is only one truth, and beside it, no other. It is sacrosanct and above criticism. Anyone who thinks differently is a heretic, who, as we know from history, is threatened with all manner of unpleasant things. Only the party boss, who holds the political power in his hands, can interpret the state doctrine authentically, and he does so just as it suits him.
History repeats itself. Sometimes Jung in his writing seems like a prophet, or like a seers, that sees ahead of time what we're going to go through. But really, he lived through it himself, through World War II and through World War I, and also through the rise of communism. But from to explain what he's saying, it's really the difference between being fully focused on extroversion and looking at the world as an extroverted principle, and not having any introversion, not having any practice where we engage with the extra mundane, we engage with spirit, where we become inspired, by a spiritual relationship with the extra mundane, that realization of an internal connection with spirit gives us the ability to be objective and to resist the infection of the collective psychosis.
Yeah, in this paragraph, you probably couldn't describe our times better than in what he just said in this paragraph.
Well,
The fanaticism,
yeah.
any opposition is stamped out without even looking at it. I mean, everything. The state
Well,
becomes God. This is what Ayn Rand said too. This is why I feature her work too, and that'll be in other videos. But yeah, it's like you have the self is the individual is the most important. It's what makes up the society. Yet we've completely thrown that out the window, haven't we?
Right. My
You want
turn,
to take
right?
this next one? This next one's pretty good.
When, through mass rule, the individual becomes social unit, number so and so, and the state is elevated to the supreme principle, it is only to be expected that the religious function too will be sucked into the maelstrom. Religion, as the careful observation and taking account of certain invincible and uncontrollable factors, is an instinctive attitude peculiar to man. And its manifestation can be followed all through human history. Its evident purpose is to maintain the psychic balance for the natural man as an equally natural knowledge of the fact that his conscious functions may at any time be thwarted by uncontrollable happenings coming from inside as well as from outside. For this reason, he has always taken care that any difficult decision likely to have consequences for himself and others shall be rendered safe by suitable measures of a religious nature. Offerings are made to the invisible powers, formidable blessings are pronounced, and all kinds of solemn rites are performed. Everywhere and at all times there has been rite d'entrée et de sortie, whose efficacy is impugned as magic and superstition by rationalistic incapable of psychological insight. But magic, as above all, a psychological effect whose importance should not be underestimated. The performance of a magical action gives the person concerned a feeling of security, which is absolutely essential for carrying out a decision, because a decision is inevitably somewhat one-sided and is therefore rightly felt to be a risk. Even a dictator thinks it necessary not only to accompany his acts of state with threats, but to stage them with all manners of solemnities, brass bands, flags, banners, parades, and monster demonstrations are no different in principle from ecclesiastic processions, cannonades, and fireworks to scare off demons. Only the suggestive parade of state power engenders a collective feeling of security, which, unlike religious demonstrations, give the individual no protection against his inner demonism. Hence, he will cling all the more to the power of the state, namely to the mass, thus delivering himself up to it psychically as well as morally, and putting the finishing touch to his social depotentiation. The state, like the church, demands enthusiasm, self-sacrifice, and love. And if religion requires or presupposes the fear of God, then the dictator state takes good care to provide the necessary terror. What a paragraph, huh?
Yeah, isn't that fantastic? I wonder what they could be using to scare people now. We won't go into it, but just think about it to yourself.
Well, what I think what's really important in the chapter, in the paragraph, is this sense of the value of rituals and spiritual practice. This act of doing introversion and having a spiritual practice and having a personal experience of the God within is what gives you the security, because really in a collective mass state, we're all feeling so insecure because our spirit is not being heard. We're just a number to people, we're just, and so then we have that, so in a nutshell, here's the crisis of the individual in society, is that the individual in society doesn't feel as an individual. He doesn't have a voice. He doesn't have his own connection with the inner spirit world, uh, and and uh, and because of that, uh, he looks to external symbols provided by the state that gives him a sense of security. And so that sense of security is a great need that we have, but it can only be gotten by a connection with spirit. And the state may offer it, but really it falls short.
It's a disassociation from self. With Jung cites Gustav Le Bon a lot, and then Le Bon he said that the crowd, why you feel very secure in this crowd of other people who are homogenous, like to your views, and what happens is the crowd almost is like a surrogate womb.
Right.
It's womb like, it provides that protection, right?
Right.
And it's kind of like, so there's like the me, myself, and I. And what Ayn Rand says, it's the cult of the we, the us, and the our.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's kind of what happens when you're relegated to just being a statistical factor and basically a mathematical equation instead of a real live human being who has a soul.
Cool.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You go.
Okay, here we go. This one is, it just keeps going. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
When the rationalist directs the main force of his attack against the miraculous effect of the right as asserted by tradition, he has in reality completely missed the mark. The essential point, the psychological effect, is overlooked, although both parties make use of it for directly opposite purposes. A similar situation prevails with regards to their respective conceptions of the goal of religion, deliverance from evil, reconciliation with God, rewards in the hereafter, and so on, turn into worldly promises about freedom from care for one's daily bread, the just distribution of material goods, universal prosperity in the future, and shorter working hours. That the fulfillment of these promises is as far off as paradise only furnishes yet another analogy and underlines the fact that the masses have been converted from an extra-mundane goal to a purely worldly belief, which is extolled with exactly the same religious fervor and exclusiveness that the creeds display in the other direction.
Yeah, that's how I see it. I see that really in terms of the evolution of the human spirit. We're kind of back into the dark ages, where, but instead of the church being dominant and the feudal lords, now we have the state, who has become the arbiter and the judge of our behavior, and we cower to the state as we cower to the church, or we cower to this dogma that is science.
Yeah, and it's completely materialistic. Completely materialistic. I always say that no one's more materialistic than a statist or a communist, right? Like that's all they care about. They don't even care about the people they're claiming to try and help. It's wild.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's kind of the dark ages in the same way,
Oh,
it's anyway, it's
absolutely,
really interesting.
absolutely the same. Absolutely the
Mhm.
same.
In order, so next paragraph. In order not to repeat myself unnecessarily, I shall not enumerate all the parallels between worldly and otherworldly beliefs, but shall content myself with emphasizing the fact that a natural function which has existed from the beginning, like the religious function, cannot be disposed of with rationalistic and so-called enlightened criticism. You can, of course, represent the doctrinal contents of the creeds as impossible and subject them to ridicule, but such methods miss the point and do not affect the religious function which forms the basis of the creeds. Religion, in the sense of conscientious regard for the irrational factors of the psyche and individual fate, reappears, evilly distorted in the deification of the state and the dictator. Naturam expellas furcatamen usque recuret. Love the Latin shit. You can throw out nature with a pitchfork, but she'll always turn up again.
All right.
The leaders and dictators, having waited upon the situation correctly, are therefore doing their best to gloss over the all too obvious parallel with the deification of Caesar and to hide their real power behind the function of the state, though this, of course, alters nothing. I love
You
this
want to just go
guy.
to the next one? Yeah,
Yeah, but I,
exactly.
I think that there's something really important here, and that we, we devalue, what he says about, devaluing religion and devaluing, spiritual practices. And what Jung says is that, yes, the creeds, they're one thing, the dogmas is our other, kind of crystallization of these ideas, but the overriding principle is that it is an instinctual part of the human to want to connect with spirit all times. And we've always done it, and even now, in a state where really spirituality has been completely denigrated by, scientific, rationalistic materialism, still it is cared for by those who have a connection with spirit, and really, in a sense, it is the panacea or the cure for the collective psychosis.
Yeah, beautiful.
Really important.
Beautiful. Well said.
Thank you. Go ahead.
As I've already pointed out, the dictator state, besides robbing the individual of his rights, has also cut the ground from under his feet psychically by depriving him of the metaphysical foundations of his existence. The ethical decision of the individual human being no longer counts. What alone matters is the blind movement of the mass, or the masses, and the lie thus becomes the operative principle of political action. The state has drawn the logical conclusions from this, as the existence of many millions of state slaves completely deprived of all rights mutually testifies.
Wow.
Boom.
Depriving him of the metaphysical foundations of his existence. Okay, I'll go right on to the next paragraph.
Sure, yeah.
Both the dictator state and denominational religion lay quite particular emphasis on the idea of community. This is the basic ideal of communism, and it thrusts down the throats of the people so much that it has the exact opposite of the desired effects. It inspires divisive mistrust. The church, which is no less emphatic, appears on its side as a communal ideal, and where the church is notoriously weak, as in Protestantism, the hope or belief in a communal experience makes up for the painful lack of cohesion. As can easily be seen, community, and he puts the word community under quotation, is an indispensable aid in the organization of masses and is therefore a two-edged weapon. Just as the addition of however many zeros will never make a unit, so the value of a community depends on the spiritual and moral stature of the individuals composing it. For this reason, one cannot expect from the community any effect that would outweigh the suggestive influence of the environment. I'll repeat that. For this reason, one cannot expect from the community any effect that would outweigh the suggestive influence of the environment. That is, a real and fundamental change in individuals, whether for good or for bad. Such changes can come only from the personal encounter between man and man, but not from communistic or Christian baptism in mass, which do not touch the inner man. How superficial the effect of communal propaganda actually is can be seen from the recent events in Eastern Europe. The communal ideal reckons with its host, overlooking the individual human being who in the end will assert its claims. I think that was written in that. So there's a note there, about the events in Eastern Europe, written in 1957. Was that there was a rising up of people against communism then, I believe, in I don't know exactly which country broke free, but that seems to be what he's referring to. But from a purely postmodern, because from the hippie movement and from being countercultural, we talk about community also a lot. We value community, and we had that discussion about the age of Aquarius, the value of the individual versus the community. And so really, just to value community, the community is about the individual and their moral and spiritual engagement that make the community something special. And so really, when it comes down to it, the community starts with the relationship between two individuals, and how we, just like what we're doing, we're building community, but we have to do that one person at a time. And most importantly, we in our own processes and in our own disciplines, we have to be willing to engage with that factor within ourselves that is the common denominator. Jung gives the example of many zeros. You keep adding zeros. My spiritual master, when I was with the Hare Krishnas, he said the same thing. He said, spirit is the one that you put in front of all the zeros that make it worth it. You keep adding zeros together, you all got zeros. You only need the one in front of them, and then it becomes 100, 1,000, 1,000,000. But without the one, which is spirit, the zeros are valueless. And that's what we need to understand, is that unless we as individuals develop a relationship with that one, with spirit within ourselves, then really we have no value. We're just one of the zeros added to the others. And I think that that's the essence of the crisis that we're going through. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, brilliant. That's what all the people I focus on say the exact same thing. No amount of zeros will end up to a single hole, right? And that's why the shoring up of yourself as an individual, only then will you have any value to give to a
Right.
community, right? And so the community, if it's a bunch of zeros, what's the point of it, right? Just one mass waving a flag with the face of their dictator on it, like we have to, again, like you say, it's a one-to-one relationship with spirit.
Right.
And that's that unifying principle, that like it's like the unifying principle of love, right?
Right.
That everyone has inside of them, this unifying principle, that spark of the creator within, whatever you believe in, that spark inside of you is what we all have, and we have to nurture that and turn it into a flame.
That's beautifully said as well. So we've got two chapters within the essay covered. So we've done the Undiscovered Self, chapter 1, the plight of the individual in modern society, and chapter 2, religion as the counterbalance to mass-mindedness, and chapter 3, which we'll do next week, the position of the West on the question of religion. That should be very interesting. It's been really fun. How do you feel about the work that we've done so far, Luke?
I think it's good. I think this was a really good video, I think, today, and this chapter was great. I'm glad we got to cover it together, and I think our comments were right on point.
Yes, no, I think it's really important to just try to translate that's what I do in my work. When there's two outcomes, well, I have three outcomes that I seek in my work. I seek, one, to get people to read Jung. It's most important, because, we talk a lot about Jung, but very few people actually read him. And this is the purpose of these is to help you get a taste for reading Jung, because, there's 18 volumes of incredible material. And this is just, one of the essays that he's written. And it's a very accessible one. So we encourage you to get the book and to catch up with us. We've put 3 videos already so far, and then we'll keep doing it, and we'll be at it for quite a few weeks still. So your comments and your engagement and your questions is really important to us, and also you subscribing to our channels. The name of your channel is what, Luke?
It's Feel the Link.
Feel the Link. And what do you do on your channel?
I basically link together different thinkers that are not well known today, including Jung, and I try and translate it in a way so that people will have some tools that they can use to help fortify themselves as individuals. The recent video I did was on Michael Meade and the presentation he did when he was working with James Hillman. And it's called Elders versus Olders. And he kind of explains what's the difference between an elder or an older. And it's beautiful, and I have my own writings pasted in between. And I use some examples from novels that give a good example of what an elder is. And it's
beautiful.
Beautiful. Myth and poetry is the voice of the soul, right? And Michael Meade talks about that a lot. And he's amazing, and not too many people know who he is either. So I wanted to put that guy in there.
Well, what a great storyteller. If you have a chance to look at his work, and his storytelling is phenomenal.
His voice is amazing too. He has that accent, that American accent that's just so great. I love it.
Oh, as American as it can get, for sure. And his work with James Hillman is really big too. And James Hillman is another one of the giants that we have in Jungian thoughts and in this new age philosophies that we're creating. So Luke has just started this channel, so please do subscribe to that. And then the Healer and the Dreamer Astrology channel needs your support as well. Please subscribe, and comments, questions, and shares and reactions, all of those help us grow. I finally made it to over 300 followers. I'm up to 306, so that's exciting. And how many do you have? Humble beginning.
I think I have 9.
9.
Yeah.
So
I
So
put the links below to your site and channel every time, so you might get 3 more followers from me. I think the other 6 are from your channel. So
well, it's cross-pollination. There's going to be a time where we'll reflect on us and we'll keep going, keep doing the good work, and always an honor working with you, brother.
it's great. I think it went great today. Thanks, Martin.
You're so welcome.
See you,
And
everyone.
we're out. MC Starman and Luke Renda, thank you for joining us.